There is a comforting story most people tell themselves. A story where they are the good one. They believe they are kind by nature, moral by instinct, incapable of true cruelty. They see monsters as something separate, villains in history books, tyrants in documentaries, criminals on the news, people fundamentally different from them. But this belief is not a virtue, it is a blind spot. Because the most dangerous lies are not the ones told by others, that they are the ones we tell ourselves about who we are. If you ask someone whether they could ever become cruel, most would answer immediately, no. If you asked whether they could ever betray their values, harm others, or justify something deeply wrong, they would feel almost offended by the question. And yet, history quietly laughs at this confidence. Because history is not written by monsters who knew they were monsters. It is written by ordinary people who believed they were right. This is the first uncomfortable truth. Being good is not a permanent state. It is a fragile condition, and it breaks far more easily than we like to admit. Most people imagine moral collapse as dramatic, a sudden snap, a single dark choice, a clear moment where someone crosses a line. But reality is far more subtle. Moral collapse is quiet. It whispers before it screams, it nudges before it pushes. It begins with thoughts so small they feel harmless. Just this once. I had no choice. Anyone would have done the same. This is how the descent starts. Not with evil, but with permission. The human mind is remarkably skilled at protecting its self-image. We don't want to see ourselves as capable of harm, so we create mental filters. We explain, we reframe, we soften the edges of our actions until they feel acceptable. And the moment we do that, something shifts. What once felt wrong begins to feel negotiable. Psychologically, this happens because identity is more important to us than truth. We will bend reality before we bend our self-image. When our actions threaten the idea of I am a good person, the mind rushes in to repair the damage. Not by changing behavior, but by changing meaning. This is why people don't fall into darkness by abandoning morality. They fall into it by redefining morality. At first, the changes are almost invisible. A small lie to avoid conflict. A rule bent because the outcome feels justified. A moment of cruelty excused because someone else deserved it. Each choice feels isolated. Each decision feels reasonable. And because the consequences are not immediate, the mind records it as safe, but the brain is always learning. Every time you cross a line and survive it, that line moves. Neuroscience calls this adaptation, philosophy calls it erosion. And over time, the person you used to be becomes a reference point instead of a boundary. You don't notice the change because you are inside it. This is why people often say, I don't know how I became this way. They didn't become it overnight. They became it one justification at a time. Another unsettling truth is this: good intentions do not protect you. In fact, they often accelerate the fall. When someone believes their intentions are pure, they feel licensed to ignore the damage they cause. The belief I mean well becomes a shield against accountability. This is where moral confidence turns dangerous, because the more certain someone is of their own goodness, the less likely they are to question themselves. And unquestioned morality is how cruelty hides in plain sight. Think about how often harm is explained away with purpose. It was necessary. It was for the greater good. Someone had to do it. These phrases don't come from villains twirling mustaches. They come from people who see themselves as responsible, rational, even ethical. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of humility. True morality requires the courage to doubt yourself. Without that doubt, conviction hardens into certainty. And certainty is the enemy of conscience. There is another force at work here, one most people underestimate: pressure. Human beings are deeply social creatures. We adapt to expectations, authority, and environment far more than we like to believe. When a system rewards silence, silence becomes normal. When cruelty is tolerated, empathy becomes inconvenient. And when everyone around you is doing something, not doing it begins to feel like rebellion. Under pressure, values become flexible. Not because people suddenly stop caring, but because caring becomes costly. The mind begins to ask different questions, not is this right, but what happens if I don't? This is the moment morality shifts from internal to external. And once your sense of right and wrong depends on approval, safety, or belonging, it no longer belongs to you. This is why people who once stood for justice later defend things they would have condemned. The environment didn't force them, it trained them. Slowly, patiently, invisibly. And the most unsettling part? At no point do they feel like they've become someone else. They still feel like themselves. This is the trap. The human mind is not designed to alert you when you are becoming morally distorted. It is designed to help you survive, fit in, and reduce discomfort. Which means it will always choose comfort over truth unless challenged. So here is the question that matters, not philosophically but personally. If morality erodes quietly, if justification feels reasonable, if pressure reshapes values, how would you know if it was happening to you? Most people think the answer is awareness, but awareness alone is not enough, because in the next session we will explore something far more dangerous than ignorance, the belief that you are awake, rational, and immune, and why that belief has destroyed more integrity than ignorance ever could. There is a moment in every moral descent that feels strangely empowering. It is the moment you stop asking if you're right and start assuming that you are. This is where the transformation accelerates. In the beginning, doubt exists, a faint tension between action and conscience, a quiet discomfort that whispers, something about this feels off. But doubt is uncomfortable, and the human mind does not tolerate discomfort for long. So it searches for relief. That relief arrives in the form of justification. Justification is not a lie we tell others, it is a story we tell ourselves so convincingly that it replaces reality. Once justification takes root, behavior no longer needs to change, only interpretation does. This is where morality doesn't disappear, it mutates. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the mental strain we feel when our actions conflict with our values. But most people misunderstand how it works. They assume dissonance forces people to act better. In reality, it usually does the opposite. Instead of changing behavior to match values, people change values to protect identity. Because admitting wrongdoing threatens something deeper than reputation. It threatens the image of who we believe we are. So the mind rewrites the narrative. I was provoked. They would have done the same. This isn't cruelty, it's realism. This isn't selfish, it's self-respect. Each justification removes friction, and with less friction, movement becomes faster. This is why people rarely feel like they're becoming worse. They feel like they're becoming more honest, more decisive, more real. Cruelty begins to feel like clarity. Coldness begins to feel like strength. And empathy begins to feel like weakness. This is not accidental. Once someone convinces themselves they are right, disagreement stops being informative and starts feeling like an attack. And when disagreement feels like an attack, defense becomes justified. This is how moral certainty turns into aggression. History shows this pattern again and again. The most destructive movements are not fueled by hatred alone, they are fueled by righteousness. People do not commit atrocities believing they are evil, they do it believing they are necessary. There is a dangerous illusion embedded in moral confidence, the belief that good people cannot do bad things. Once someone accepts this illusion, their logic becomes circular. I am good, therefore my actions are justified. If harm occurs, it must be acceptable, and anyone who questions them becomes part of the problem. This is where morality stops being about principles and starts being about identity. It's no longer, is this right? It becomes, what does this say about me? And when morality is tied to ego, truth becomes optional. Another force strengthens this illusion: moral licensing. Moral licensing is the unconscious permission. People give themselves to behave badly because they believe they've earned the right. A person who sees themselves as generous feels entitled to be cruel. A person who believes they've suffered feels justified in making others suffer. A person who believes they stand for justice feels authorized to silence opposition. The irony is brutal. The more someone sees themselves as virtuous, the less they feel constrained by virtue. This is how people who fight injustice begin to resemble the thing they oppose. And still, they don't see it. Because the mind protects consistency at all costs. Once someone adopts the belief, I am on the right side, evidence stops being evaluated honestly. It becomes filtered. Contradictions are dismissed. Criticism is reframed as ignorance. Harm is minimized, and empathy becomes selective. This is where dehumanization quietly enters. Not loudly, not violently, it enters through language. They're ignorant, they're toxic, they're dangerous, they're not like us. The moment a person stops being seen as fully human, moral restraint weakens. You don't feel the same obligation toward abstractions as you do toward people. And the mind loves abstractions. It's easier to hurt an idea than a face, easier to attack a label than a life. This is why cruelty spreads fastest in environments where people are reduced to categories. Once someone becomes the enemy, empathy becomes treason. And once empathy is gone, almost anything can be justified. What makes this terrifying is how ordinary it feels. This process doesn't require hatred. It doesn't require sadism. It doesn't even require anger. It only requires certainty. Certainty that you are right. Certainty that they are wrong. Certainty that outcomes matter more than methods. At this stage, people stop seeing harm as harm. They see it as collateral, necessary damage, the cost of progress. And the most dangerous part, they feel calm. Moral collapse is not always chaotic. Sometimes it is disturbingly orderly because once conscience is replaced by conviction, doubt disappears. And without doubt, there is no break. So ask yourself something uncomfortable. Have you ever defended an action you once would have condemned, simply because you were the one doing it? Have you ever dismissed someone's pain because acknowledging it would threaten your self-image? Have you ever felt more justified the more resistance you faced? If so, you felt the pull of this force, not because you're broken, but because you're human. The question is not whether this process exists. The question is whether anything can stop it. Because in the next session, we will confront the most powerful accelerator of all: the environment, the system, the culture, the invisible pressures that shape behavior without asking permission, and why even strong individuals collapse when surrounded by the wrong incentives. If this opened your eyes, subscribe. What comes next changes how you see yourself and the world. There is a comforting myth people cling to when confronting evil. They believe monsters are born, not made. That cruelty comes from broken individuals, twisted minds, or rare psychological flaws. This belief protects us because if monsters are different, then we are safe. If they are abnormal, then we are innocent. But this belief collapses the moment you look closely. Because the most powerful force shaping human behavior is not personality, it is environment. People do not act in isolation. They act inside system, families, workplaces, cultures, ideologies, and systems quietly teach behavior long before they ever demand it. A toxic environment does not ask you to become cruel. It simply rewards silence, compliance, and adaptation. And over time, those rewards reshape values. This is why good people do not suddenly turn dark. They adjust. They adjust to what is tolerated. They adjust to what is normalized. They adjust to what is rewarded. The mind is a survival instrument. It learns patterns quickly. If honesty is punished, honesty fades. If empathy is mocked, empathy retreats. If cruelty is profitable, cruelty becomes efficient. No announcement is made, no alarm sounds. The system does not say, abandon your morals. It says, this is how things work. And most people comply, not because they are weak, but because resistance is costly. This is where the illusion of choice becomes dangerous. People like to believe they always act freely, that their decisions are purely personal. But freedom inside a system is often conditional. When refusing means isolation, when speaking up means punishment, when dissent means exclusion, morality becomes expensive. And most people don't consciously choose evil. They choose comfort, they choose belonging, they choose survival, and then they justify it later. This is why environments are more dangerous than intentions. A corrupt system doesn't need bad people. It turns ordinary people into participants. At first, you notice small things, jokes that cross lines, practices that feel questionable, rules that bend just this once. You feel uneasy, but everyone else seems fine, so you doubt yourself. And doubt, when unsupported, becomes silence. Silence is the system's favorite ally because silence looks like consent. And once silence becomes routine, participation follows naturally. This is how moral drift happens, not through orders, but through normalization. The philosopher Hannah Arendt described this phenomenon when observing one of history's darkest chapters. She didn't find monsters driven by hatred. She found ordinary individuals who stopped thinking critically. Not evil minds, unquestioning ones. This is the true danger of systems. They don't require cruelty. They only require compliance. And compliance doesn't feel like corruption. It feels like professionalism, like realism, like maturity. You start telling yourself, this isn't ideal, but it's not my responsibility. I can't change the system. I'm just doing my part. And that phrase, just doing my part, has followed every large-scale moral collapse in history. Because when responsibility is diluted, conscience disappears. Another powerful environmental force is group identity. Humans are tribal by nature. We divide the world into us and them instinctively. And once that division hardens, morality becomes selective. We forgive our group, we scrutinize outsiders, we justify harm if it protects belonging. This is why intelligent people can defend irrational cruelty not because they lack reason, but because reason has been recruited to serve loyalty. Logic becomes a weapon, not a guide. And the more someone identifies with a group, the harder it becomes to question it. Because questioning the group feels like questioning yourself. This is where personal integrity dissolves into collective identity. You stop asking what you believe. You ask what we believe. And when we decide something is acceptable, dissent feels like betrayal. This is how environments override conscience. Not through force, but through identity. And here is the most uncomfortable truth of all. No amount of intelligence protects you from this. In fact, intelligence often makes it worse. Because intelligent people are better at rationalization, better at constructing arguments, better at defending contradictions. They don't resist corruption. They'll just, so at the end of the day, they explain it beautifully. This is why moral collapse often wears the mask of sophistication. It speaks calmly. It sounds reasonable. It feels justified. And still, it spreads. So the question becomes unavoidable. If the environment is this powerful, if systems shape behavior this deeply, is anyone truly responsible? This is where many people give up. They conclude that humans are helpless, that morality is an illusion, that corruption is inevitable. But this conclusion is itself a trap. Because while environments shape behavior, they do not erase choice, they only test it. And that brings us to the final session, the most important one. Because in the end, the line between good and evil is not drawn by circumstances alone. It is drawn by what you resist, what you tolerate, and what you've refused to become. In the final session, we will confront the ultimate truth, the one idea that decides whether a person becomes a monster or remains human. There is one final illusion that must be dismantled. It is the belief that the battle between good and evil happens out there, in politics, in systems, in history, in other people. That belief is comforting. Because if evil lives outside of us, then all we need to do is avoid it, oppose it, or condemn it. But the truth is far more unsettling. The battle does not happen out there. It happens within. Every day. In small moments. In decisions no one applauds or punishes. The most dangerous lie humanity ever accepted is that monsters are fundamentally different from us. Because that lie allows us to stop watching ourselves. The Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn once wrote that the line separating good and evil does not run between nations or ideologies. It runs through the human heart. Not some hearts, every heart. This is the truth most people resist. There are no purely good people. There are no purely evil people. There are only people constantly choosing. And what makes someone monstrous is not one decision, but the accumulation of unexamined ones. Most moral collapse is not dramatic. It is not marked by violence or betrayal at first. It is marked by silence, by looking away, by staying quiet when something feels wrong, by telling yourself, but this isn't the hill to die on. And maybe it isn't. But the question is not whether any single moment matters. The question is what you become by repeatedly choosing comfort over conscience. Because identity is not what you believe. It is what you practice. People often ask, what would I have done in those moments of history? And they imagine extremes in a heroic resistance or horrific compliance. But history is not built from extremes. It is built from ordinary people making ordinary choices repeatedly. You don't wake up one day as a monster. You wake up one day and realize you stopped asking certain questions. Questions like, is this still who I want to be? What am I justifying now that I once wouldn't have? What part of myself have I silenced to make life easier? The most dangerous moment is not when you choose wrong. It is when you stop noticing. Because awareness is the final defense. Not intelligence, not education, not good intentions. Awareness. Awareness that you are vulnerable. Awareness that you are capable. Awareness that no identity, kind, moral, rational, awake, protects you from self-deception. In fact, identities often make it worse. The moment you say, I am not the kind of person who could do that, you stop watching for the signs. And the signs always come quietly. They arrive as rationalizations, as impatience, as contempt, as emotional numbness. You start speaking about people as problems, about suffering as inconvenience, about harm as necessity. And each time it feels reasonable, until one day you look back and recognize a version of yourself you never meant to become. So, what stops this? Not purity, not perfection, but responsibility. Responsibility is not about blame, it is about ownership. It is the willingness to say, what I allow, I participate in. What I excuse, I strengthen. What I repeat, I become. Responsibility means resisting the temptation to outsource morality to authority, to groups, to systems, to trends. It means choosing to think when thinking is inconvenient, to feel when feeling is costly, to remain human when dehumanization is rewarded. This does not make life easier, it makes it heavier. But weight is the price of integrity. There is no final victory over darkness, there is only vigilance. Because the same forces that corrupt people do not disappear once you understand them. They wait. They wait for fatigue, for fear, for loneliness, for certainty. They wait for the moment you say, just this once. And that is why the work never ends. To remain human is not to be flawless. It is to stay awake, to question your motives, to doubt your righteousness, to protect empathy even when it feels naive, to remember that every person you reduce to an abstraction becomes easier to harm, including yourself. This is the final truth. You will never fully escape the capacity for darkness, but you can refuse to feed it. You can notice the small compromises before they become habits. You can interrupt the story you tell yourself. You can choose reflection over reaction. And when you fail, because you will, you can return. That is what separates people from monsters. Not innocence, but the willingness to confront who they are becoming. Because in the end, morality is not about being good. It is about being honest. Honest about your power, honest about your weakness, honest about the line that runs through you, and choosing again and again which side you will strengthen. Not once, but today and tomorrow and every day after.